The Dominion had ruled the stars for over 10,000 years. They had conquered 17 star systems and enslaved billions of beings across the galaxy. Their warships were the size of small moons, and their weapons could turn entire planets into dust. No species had ever defeated them in battle. No species had ever even come close. Admiral Eth stood on the command deck of his flagship and watched the stars pass by through the massive observation window. He was old by standards, having lived for nearly 3 centuries, and he had seen more death and destruction than most beings could imagine. He commanded the 8th Extinction Fleet, a force of 3,000 warships that had never known defeat. They called him the Ender of Worlds, and he had earned that name many times over. His tactical officer approached with a data tablet in his clawed hands. There were tall creatures with gray skin and large black eyes. They had evolved on a cold world with little sunlight, and their bodies reflected that harsh environment. They felt no pity. They knew no mercy. They existed only to conquer and consume. "Admiral, we have located another inhabited world," the officer said. "A small blue planet orbiting an unremarkable yellow star. The inhabitants call it Earth." Eth took the tablet and reviewed the information. The planet was located in a quiet corner of the galaxy, far from any major trade routes or strategic positions. The dominant species called themselves humans. They had only recently developed nuclear technology and had not yet achieved faster-than-light travel. By galactic standards, they were primitives. They broadcast their location into space. The officer continued with a sound that might have been laughter. "Radio waves, television signals, mathematical sequences. They have been announcing their presence for nearly a century. They practically invited us to find them." The admiral studied the images of Earth. Blue oceans, green continents, white clouds. It looked peaceful. It looked fragile. It looked like every other world he had ever destroyed. "How long until we arrive?" he asked. 6 months at current speed. We could increase to maximum and arrive in 4. "There is no need to rush. Prepare the standard subjugation protocol. We will give them one chance to surrender. If they refuse, we will make an example of them." The officer bowed and left to carry out his orders. Eth returned his gaze to the stars. He had done this so many times that it had become routine. Another world, another conquest, another species added to the long list of the defeated. The humans would be no different. But the admiral was wrong. The humans would be very different indeed. On the other side of the galaxy, deep in a bunker in the mountains of New Mexico, Dr. Laura was working the night shift at the Deep Space Monitoring Station. She was 34 years old with short brown hair and tired eyes. She had spent her entire career searching the stars for signs of intelligent life, and she had always believed that one day she would find something. She just never expected that something to find her first. The signal appeared on her screen at exactly 3:47 in the morning. It was faint at first, just a blip among the background noise of the universe. But as she refined the instruments and focused the array, the signal grew stronger and clearer. It was not natural. It was not random. It was a pattern, a deliberate transmission from something that was heading directly toward Earth. Laura's hands trembled as she ran the calculations. Whatever was sending this signal was large, very large, and it was moving fast. At its current speed, it would reach Earth in approximately 6 months. She picked up the phone and dialed a number she had been given years ago but had never expected to use. A tired voice answered on the 3rd ring. "This is General Cross." "General, this is Doctor at the Deep Space Station. I need you to listen very carefully. Something is coming." Within hours, the news had spread through the highest levels of government. President Daniel was woken in the middle of the night and brought to the Situation Room. He was a tall man with gray hair and a calm demeanor. He had been a construction worker before entering politics, and he had built his career on the principle that every problem could be solved with enough hard work and common sense. But this problem was unlike anything he had ever faced. General Cross briefed him on the situation. The approaching objects were definitely artificial. They were definitely heading for Earth, and based on their size and energy signatures, they were definitely not friendly. "How long do we have?" the president asked. 6 months, sir, maybe less. Sat in silence for a long moment. He thought about his wife, Sandra, who was sleeping peacefully back at the residence. He thought about his daughter, who was 7 years old and still believed that her father could protect her from anything. He thought about the 8 billion people on Earth who were going about their lives without any idea that their world was about to change forever. Who else knows about this? Just us, sir, and our allies will need to be informed within the hour. The president nodded slowly. Then we need to make some decisions, and we need to make them fast. Over the next few weeks, the world learned the truth. Governments held emergency sessions. News networks broadcast the story around the clock. Religious leaders gave sermons about the end times. Some people panicked. Some people simply went about their lives because there was nothing else they could do. But slowly, something remarkable began to happen. The petty conflicts that had divided humanity for centuries began to fade. Old enemies set aside their differences. Resources that had been hoarded were shared. Factories that had produced consumer goods began producing weapons. Scientists who had competed for grants began collaborating on solutions. For the first time in history, the human race spoke with one voice. Commander Morgan was placed in charge of the newly formed United Earth Defense Initiative. She was 42 years old with a military background and a reputation for getting things done. She had commanded soldiers in 3 different wars, but this would be the most important mission of her life. "We have 6 months to prepare for an invasion by a technologically superior force," she told her assembled officers. "We do not know their numbers. We do not know their capabilities. We do not know their weaknesses. What we do know is that they are coming here to conquer us or destroy us, and we are not going to let that happen." The preparations began immediately. Cities were evacuated and populations dispersed into the countryside. Underground bunkers were expanded and stocked with supplies. Weapons were manufactured at a pace never seen before in human history. Satellites were secretly launched with experimental defense systems. Soldiers trained day and night for a battle that would determine the fate of their species. And in a secret facility beneath the Swiss Alps, Dr. Marsh led a team of scientists in studying something that the public had never been told about. In 1954, a craft of unknown origin had crashed in a remote area of Nevada. The wreckage had been recovered and hidden away for decades. Its technology had been studied but never fully understood. Until now. "Can we use it?" Commander Morgan asked during one of her visits to the facility. Looked up from his work with exhausted eyes. "Maybe. The principles are beyond anything we have ever developed, but we are learning. Every day we are learning. Learn faster. We are running out of time." Above the Earth, the stars continued to shine. But something dark was approaching through the void. Something that had never been defeated. Something that believed it had nothing to fear from the small blue planet in its path. They were coming, and they had no idea what was waiting for them. The Armada entered the Sol system on a cold morning in January. They came out of faster-than-light travel in perfect formation, 3,000 warships arranged in a pattern that had brought terror to 17 star systems. Each ship was armed with plasma cannons that could melt through any known material. Each ship carried thousands of soldiers bred for combat. Together, they represented the greatest military force ever assembled against a single planet. Admiral Eth stood on his command deck and watched the blue world grow larger in his observation window. It looked so peaceful from this distance, so unaware. He had seen this same scene countless times before, and it always ended the same way, with fire and submission and the slow death of hope. "Disable their orbital infrastructure," he commanded. A pulse of electromagnetic energy swept outward from the fleet. On Earth, every satellite went dark in an instant. Communication networks collapsed. GPS systems failed. The planet was suddenly blind and deaf, cut off from the eyes it had placed in the sky. In the underground bunker beneath the Rocky Mountains, President Daniel watched the screens go black one by one. Around him, his advisors shouted and scrambled to restore connections that could not be restored. But the president remained calm. They had expected this. They had prepared for this. "Switch to the backup systems," he ordered. "Ground-based communications only. Initiate Protocol 7. Across the world, hidden networks came to life. Fiber optic cables buried deep underground carried signals that no electromagnetic pulse could touch. Radio towers disguised as cell phone antennas began broadcasting on frequencies the aliens had not thought to jam. The blindness was temporary. Humanity could still see. Humanity could still fight. Admiral Eth activated his transmission systems and broadcast his message across every frequency the humans used. His voice was cold and emotionless, translated by machines into every language spoken on Earth. "People of Earth, I am Admiral Eth of the Dominion. Your world has been selected for integration into our empire. You have two choices: surrender unconditionally and become servants of the Dominion, or resist and be destroyed. You have one rotation of your planet to provide your answer. Choose wisely." The transmission ended. Silence fell across the world. In the bunker, the Emergency Council convened to decide the fate of humanity. Politicians argued about negotiation. Generals argued about resistance. Scientists argued about possibilities that seemed impossible. Everyone had an opinion. Everyone had a fear. Everyone knew that whatever they decided in the next few hours would determine whether their species lived or died. President listened to all of them. He asked questions. He considered options. He thought about the reports from the monitoring stations that had tracked the alien fleet for months. 3,000 ships, each one larger than any aircraft carrier ever built. Weapons beyond human comprehension. Soldiers who had never known defeat. The odds were not good. The odds were terrible. The odds suggested that resistance was futile and surrender was the only logical choice. But Daniel had never been very good at doing the logical thing. "What happens to the species they conquer?" he asked quietly. General Cross pulled up the intelligence reports. They had intercepted alien communications. They had analyzed their patterns. They had built a picture of what life under rule looked like. "Slavery," the general said. "The conquered populations are used as labor. They mine resources. They build ships. They serve until they are used up. The average of a slave species under control is 3 generations before they go extinct." The president closed his eyes. He saw his daughter's face. He saw the faces of every child on Earth. He imagined them in chains, working until they died, their children doing the same and thereafter them, until there was nothing left, until humanity was just another name on a long list of species that had been erased from existence. "Then we fight," he said. The council fell silent. Some looked relieved. Some looked terrified. Some looked at the president as if he had lost his mind. "Sir, with respect, we cannot win this war," one advisor said. "Their technology is centuries ahead of ours. Their numbers are overwhelming. Fighting will only make our extinction more painful." Stood up and walked to the window that showed a simulated view of the sky above. Somewhere up there, 3,000 alien warships were waiting for an answer. "Maybe you are right," he said. "Maybe we cannot win, but our children will not grow up as slaves. Our species will not die on its knees. If this is the end of humanity, then it will be an end that the galaxy remembers. We will make them pay for every inch of our world. We will hurt them so badly that no one will ever think of Earth as an easy target again. And maybe, just maybe, we will find a way to survive." He turned back to face the council. "Tell the aliens nothing. Let them wonder what we are planning, and prepare our forces. The moment they cross into our atmosphere, we hit them with everything we have." The deadline passed. No response came from Earth. Admiral Eth interpreted the silence as defiance, which was exactly what he had expected. Primitive species always believed they could resist. They always learned the truth eventually. "Begin the attack," he ordered. "Target the continent they call Australia. It is isolated from their major population centers. We will use it to demonstrate the cost of resistance." The first wave of dropships descended from the fleet, 200 vessels carrying 50,000 soldiers each. They entered the atmosphere in perfect formation, their heat shields glowing orange against the blue sky. The humans below would see them coming. The humans would have time to be afraid. But the humans were not afraid. The humans were ready. Commander Morgan watched the dropships approach from her command center in the Australian outback. The cities had been evacuated months ago. The population had dispersed into bunkers and underground shelters. What remained on the surface was not a civilian target. It was a trap. "Wait for them to reach optimal altitude," she commanded. "Then show them what we have prepared." The dropships descended to 20,000 feet, then 15,000, then 10,000. They expected to encounter some resistance, perhaps some primitive missiles, perhaps some aircraft that could be easily destroyed. They did not expect what happened next. The ground erupted. Hidden installations opened across the continent. That had been built in secret over the past 6 months, fired projectiles at speeds that no ship could avoid. Electromagnetic pulse generators knocked out entire squadrons in mid-flight. Surface-to-air missiles streaked upward by the thousands. And above them, satellites that the aliens had thought they destroyed came back online, revealing themselves as weapons platforms that rained fire from orbit. The first wave of dropships was annihilated in less than 3 minutes. Admiral Eth watched the tactical display with a mixture of confusion and anger. 200 ships lost, 10 million soldiers dead, in 3 minutes, against a species that had not even achieved faster than light travel. "How is this possible?" he demanded. His officers had no answer. The humans had hidden their defenses. They had disguised their capabilities. They had allowed them to believe they were weak, and now they were paying the price for that assumption. "It changes nothing," the admiral said finally. "They have surprised us, but they cannot win. Prepare the orbital bombardment. If they will not surrender their world, we will burn it from the sky." The plasma cannons charged. The targeting systems locked onto cities around the globe, and the bombardment began. Fire fell from the heavens. Beams of superheated plasma struck the surface with the force of nuclear explosions. Sydney was hit first, then Cairo, then Moscow. Cities that had stood for centuries were reduced to molten craters in seconds. Millions died in the initial strikes. Millions more would die in the hours that followed. But the humans did not surrender. The humans kept fighting. And deep beneath the mountains of Switzerland, a team of scientists worked frantically to activate something that would change everything. The thought they were winning. They were wrong. The bombardment continued for 12 hours. Plasma beams rained down from orbit without pause, turning cities into graveyards and graveyards into glass. The death toll climbed past 100 million in the first hour. By the 6th hour, it had reached 300 million. By the 12th hour, no one was counting anymore. President sat in the bunker beneath the Rocky Mountains and watched his world burn. Reports came in from every continent. Cities destroyed. Military installations targeted and eliminated. Civilian shelters breached by direct hits. They were not trying to conquer Earth anymore. They were trying to punish it. "How much longer can we hold out?" he asked General Cross. The general looked at the tactical displays with hollow eyes. "At this rate, maybe another day, 2 at most. They are targeting our underground facilities now. They are learning where we are hiding." And the project in Switzerland? Still operational, but Dr. Marsh says he needs more time. Time was the one thing they did not have. Every minute that passed meant more deaths. Every hour meant more cities reduced to ash. They were patient. They could keep firing until nothing was left. In the command center beneath the Swiss Alps, Dr. Marsh had not slept in 3 days. His eyes were red, and his hands shook from too much caffeine and too little rest. Around him, his team of 40 scientists worked in desperate silence, running calculations and adjusting systems that no human had ever fully understood. The device at the center of the facility was the result of 70 years of secret research. The craft that had crashed in Nevada in 1954 had contained technology far beyond anything on Earth. Most of it had been too damaged to study, but one component had survived intact, a navigation system that bent the fabric of space itself. For decades, scientists had tried to understand how it worked. They had made progress slowly, learning the principles one piece at a time. They had never been able to build anything that matched the original technology, but they had learned enough to create something new, something that might just save humanity. "Give me a status report," demanded. His lead engineer, a young woman named Rachel Murray, pulled up the latest data. "The device is charged to 92%. We can initiate in approximately 4 hours. "We do not have 4 hours. "I know, but if we try to activate before full charge, the field could collapse. The effect would be localized instead of planetary. We might only affect a portion of the fleet." Ran his hands through his hair. A portion was not enough. They needed to hit all 3,000 ships at once. If even a few hundred survived, they would continue the bombardment. They would destroy whatever was left of humanity. The plan only worked if it worked completely. "Is there any way to speed up the charging process?" Rachel hesitated. "We could reroute power from the facility's life support systems. It would give us an additional 18% efficiency. But everyone in this bunker would have approximately 30 minutes of breathable air after the transfer." Looked at his team. 40 people who had dedicated their lives to this moment. 40 people who had families on the surface, many of whom were already dead. 40 people who had every reason to want to live. "I will not ask anyone to make that sacrifice," he said. Rachel stepped forward. "You do not have to ask. We all knew what we were signing up for. Every person in this room would give their life to save Earth. Just tell us what to do." One by one, the other scientists nodded. Some had tears in their eyes. Some had their jaws set with determination. But none of them hesitated. None of them asked for more time to consider. They had made their decision long ago. Felt something catch in his throat. He had never believed in heroes. He had always thought that bravery was something that existed only in stories. But looking at these people, these ordinary men and women who were willing to die for a chance to save their species, he understood that he had been wrong. "Begin the power transfer," he said quietly. The lights in the facility dimmed as energy was rerouted to the device. The air recyclers shut down one by one. The temperature began to rise as the cooling systems went offline, but the charging indicator climbed faster now. 94%, 96%, 98%. Above them in orbit, Admiral Eth watched the destruction with cold satisfaction. The humans had put up a better fight than expected, but the outcome had never been in doubt. In a few more hours, their resistance would be completely broken. Their species would be reduced to scattered survivors hiding in caves and ruins, and the Dominion would add another world to its empire. "Admiral, we are detecting an unusual energy signature from the planet's surface." Eth turned to his sensor officer. "What kind of signature?" "Unknown, sir. It appears to be building in intensity. The source is somewhere in the mountain range they call the Alps." The Admiral frowned. The humans should not have any facilities left that could generate significant energy. The bombardment had targeted every known power station, every military installation, every research center. Whatever this was, it had been hidden well. "Can we target it?" "Already locked on, sir. Awaiting your order." "Fire." A plasma beam lanced down from orbit toward the Swiss Alps. It struck the mountain with enough force to vaporize rock and steel. The impact crater was 3 kilometers wide and half a kilometer deep. But the device was not there anymore. In the final moments before the attack, Marsh had initiated the sequence. The power had reached 100% exactly 2 minutes before the plasma beam struck, and in those 2 minutes, something impossible had happened. The device created a field that extended outward from Earth in all directions. It was invisible to the naked eye, but instruments across the planet detected it. A ripple in spacetime itself, expanding at the speed of light until it encompassed everything within 10 million kilometers of the planet, including the entire fleet. On his command deck, Admiral Eth felt the ship shudder. The stars outside the observation window began to stretch and blur. Warning alarms sounded across every system. The navigational computers reported errors that should have been impossible. "What is happening?" he demanded. No one could answer him. Space itself was bending around the fleet, twisting and folding in ways that all known physics. Ships that had been kilometers apart were suddenly touching. Ships that had been in formation were spinning out of control. The plasma cannons that had been raining destruction on Earth went silent as their targeting systems lost all reference points. The Admiral tried to order a retreat, but faster-than-light travel was impossible inside the field. He tried to contact the Dominion, but communications could not escape the distortion. For the first time in his 300 years of life, Eth felt something he had never experienced before. Fear. The field collapsed inward, taking everything with it. 3,000 warships, millions of soldiers, the greatest fleet ever assembled by the Dominion. They did not explode. They did not burn. They simply vanished, pulled into a point in space that existed somewhere else. Somewhere very far away. On Earth, the bombardment stopped. The skies that had been filled with fire went quiet. Survivors emerged from their shelters and looked up at the stars with disbelief. The ships were gone, all of them, in an instant. In the bunker beneath the Rocky Mountains, President received the report with tears streaming down his face. They had done it. Against all odds, against all reason, they had done it. "Get me the Swiss facility," he ordered. The communications officer tried for several minutes. Then she turned to the president with an expression of grief. "There is no response, sir. Our satellites show a massive impact crater where the facility used to be. They initiated the device just before the strike." Closed his eyes. Dr. Marsh, Rachel Murray, 40 scientists who had given their lives so that humanity could survive. He would make sure their names were never forgotten. He would make sure their sacrifice meant something. But for now, all he could do was mourn. Above the Earth, the stars shone peacefully. The enemy was gone, but no one knew where they had gone, and no one knew if they would ever come back. The Dominion learned of their fleet's disappearance 3 weeks after it happened. A supply convoy arriving at the rendezvous point found nothing but empty space where 3,000 warships should have been waiting. No debris, no distress signals, no explanation. The 8th Extinction Fleet had simply ceased to exist. High Overlord and received the news in his throne room on the Dominion. He was ancient even by standards, having ruled for over 500 years. In all that time, he had never lost a battle. He had never lost a fleet. He had never lost anything. Until now. "How is this possible?" he demanded of his advisors. 3,000 ships do not simply vanish. Admiral Eth was our finest commander. His fleet was invincible. The advisors had no answers. They had analyzed every piece of data. They had consulted every expert. They had even reached out to species that the Dominion had conquered, hoping that someone might have knowledge of what had happened. But no one knew anything. The fleet was gone, and it had left no trace behind. "The humans," one advisor finally suggested. "They must have developed some kind of weapon, something we did not anticipate." And considered this. The reports from before the disappearance had mentioned an unusual energy signature emanating from the planet. The humans had hidden something from the scouts, something powerful enough to destroy an entire armada in an instant. "Send another fleet," he ordered. "A larger one. Find out what they did and ensure they can never do it again." But the advisor hesitated. "High Overlord, I would advise caution. We do not know what we are dealing with. If the humans can destroy one fleet, they may be able to destroy another. Perhaps we should observe from a distance first, gather intelligence before we act." It was wise counsel, and An knew it. But wisdom was difficult to accept when his pride had been wounded so deeply. They had never retreated. They had never shown fear. To hesitate now would be to admit weakness, and weakness was something the Dominion could not afford. He was still considering his options when the first transmissions arrived. They came from the direction of a black hole 6,000 light-years from Earth. The signals were faint and distorted, stretched by gravitational forces that bent time itself, but they were unmistakably in origin, and they carried the voice of Admiral Ev. The message was fragmented and difficult to understand. Parts of it were stretched into sounds that lasted for minutes. Other parts were compressed into bursts that could barely be detected, but the meaning was clear enough. They had not been destroyed, they had been moved. The human weapon had created a fold in spacetime, a tunnel that had transported the entire fleet across thousands of light-years in an instant, and it had deposited them at the edge of a black hole's event horizon, the point of no return from which nothing could escape. The ships had tried to flee. They had activated their faster-than-light drives at maximum power, but the gravitational pull was too strong. Their engines could not overcome it. Slowly, inevitably, they were being pulled toward the singularity. Ev's final transmission was a warning. Do not attack Earth. Do not seek revenge. The humans have power beyond our understanding. If you value the Dominion's survival, leave them alone. Then the signal cut off. The fleet had crossed the event horizon. They were falling into the black hole now, stretched into streams of atoms by tidal forces beyond imagination. Their ships would be crushed to the size of grains of sand. Their bodies would be torn apart molecule by molecule, and it would take an eternity to die because time itself slowed as they approached the singularity. From their perspective, the fall would last forever. They would be conscious as their atoms separated. They would feel every moment of their destruction, stretched across centuries of subjective time. It was a fate worse than any they had ever inflicted on their victims. High Overlord and listened to the transmission in silence. When it was finished, he sat motionless for a long time. His advisors waited, not daring to speak. Finally, he gave his order. "Mark the Sol system as forbidden territory. No vessel is to approach within 100 light-years of Earth. Any commander who violates this order will be executed." The advisors bowed and left to carry out his commands. They did not question him. They did not argue. They understood what he understood. The humans had done something that no species had ever done before. They had made the afraid. On Earth, the survivors did not know what had happened to the fleet. They only knew that it was gone. In the months that followed, they emerged from their bunkers and shelters and began the long process of rebuilding. The death toll was staggering. 600 million people had died in the bombardment. Dozens of cities had been reduced to radioactive craters. The global infrastructure that humanity had built over centuries was in ruins. Food was scarce. Medicine was scarcer. And the psychological trauma of the attack would take generations to heal. But humanity had survived. Against all odds, against the most powerful military force in the galaxy, they had survived. President addressed the world from the ruins of Geneva. The city had been partially destroyed, but enough remained to serve as a symbol of resilience. Behind him, construction crews were already at work, clearing rubble and laying foundations for new buildings. "We have been tested," he said. "We have been hurt. We have lost people we loved and places we treasured, but we are still here. We are still fighting, and we will never stop." He paused and looked directly at the camera. "To whatever species sent that fleet against us, know this. We did not ask for this war. We did not want it, but we will finish it. If you come for us again, we will be ready. And next time, we will not just defend ourselves. We will take the fight to you." It was a bold statement from a planet that was still struggling to feed its population, but meant every word. The humans had learned something important from the invasion. They were not alone in the universe, and not everyone out there was friendly. The rebuilding began in earnest. Factories that had been destroyed were rebuilt and expanded. Research facilities that had been hidden underground came to the surface and grew into massive complexes. The scientific knowledge that had been gained from the 1954 crash was shared widely for the first time, accelerating human technology by decades. Within 5 years, humanity had launched its first faster-than-light vessel. It was a small ship, barely larger than a commercial airliner, but it represented an achievement that no one had thought possible just a decade earlier. The pilot, Commander Morgan, took it on a journey to the edge of the solar system and back. "Earth to mission control," she reported as she returned. "Faster-than-light travel confirmed. The stars are within our reach." Below her, on the planet she had just orbited, 8 billion people looked up at the sky with new eyes. They had always wondered if they were alone. Now they knew the answer, and they knew something else as well. The galaxy was dangerous, but humanity was dangerous too. The news of the defeat spread across the galaxy faster than light itself. Every species that had ever been conquered by the Dominion learned what had happened. Every world that lived in fear of invasion heard the story. A primitive species on a small blue planet had destroyed the mightiest fleet ever assembled, and they had done it in seconds. For the Dominion, the consequences were immediate and catastrophic. The Eighth Extinction Fleet had been more than just a military force. It had been a symbol of invincibility. With it gone, the illusion of unstoppable power was shattered. Rebellions broke out on a dozen conquered worlds within the first year. Species that had been enslaved for generations suddenly found the courage to fight back. They did not have the technology to defeat thee on their own, but they no longer believed they were invincible, and that belief made all the difference. The Dominion tried to crush the uprisings, but their military was stretched thin. They had lost 3,000 ships and millions of their best soldiers. Replacing them would take decades. In the meantime, every rebellion that succeeded inspired 2 more. The empire that had conquered 17 star systems began to crumble from within. High Overlord and died 15 years after the Earth invasion, still trying to hold his empire together. His successors fought among themselves for control of what remained. Civil wars erupted. Factions split away. Within 50 years, the Dominion had fractured into a dozen smaller states, none of them powerful enough to threaten anyone beyond their immediate borders. The species they had once enslaved did not forget what the humans had done. Stories were told and retold across the galaxy. The small blue planet became a legend, a symbol of hope for the oppressed and a warning for the powerful. Do not underestimate the seemingly weak. Do not assume that technology guarantees victory, and never, ever threaten the humans. On Earth, humanity continued to grow and change. The first generation born after the invasion came of age with a different perspective than their parents. They had grown up with stories of the bombardment, of the scientists who had sacrificed themselves, of the moment when the alien fleet had vanished from the sky. They knew that the universe was vast and dangerous, and they were determined to make sure their species was never threatened again. The United Earth government invested heavily in defense and exploration. New ships were built, faster and more powerful than anything that had come before. Weapons were developed that could match or exceed what they had possessed, and scouts were sent out into the galaxy to learn about the civilizations that existed beyond the solar system. First contact with friendly species came 25 years after the invasion. The collective was a loose alliance of civilizations that had resisted expansion for centuries. They had watched Earth's defense with astonishment and sent an ambassador to open diplomatic relations. Ambassador Ara arrived on Earth with a single ship and no weapons. She was not, but a member of a species that had lost there to the Dominion long ago. Her people now lived on space stations and refugee worlds, always moving, always hiding. She had never expected to meet a species that had actually defeated the conquerors. President Cole received her in Geneva, which had been rebuilt into a gleaming city of towers and gardens. The scars of the bombardment were still visible in some places, preserved as memorials to those who had died. But the city itself was thriving, a testament to human resilience and determination. "Your species is remarkable," Ara said as they walked through the memorial gardens. "You had no faster-than-light travel, no energy shields, no plasma weapons. By every measure you should have been conquered like so many others. Yet here you stand, stronger than ever." Paused beside a statue of Dr. Marsh, the scientist who had activated the device that saved humanity. His face was cast in bronze, looking up at the stars he had never lived to explore. "We had something that did not expect," she said. "We had each other. When the invasion came, we stopped fighting among ourselves and started fighting together. Every nation, every culture, every individual who could hold a weapon or build a machine or write a line of code. We became one species, one people, united against a common threat. And the weapon you used, the one that transported their fleet," smiled slightly. "That was based on technology we did not fully understand. We had been studying it for decades, but we never knew if it would work until we tried it. In the end, we got lucky." Ara studied her with ancient eyes. "I do not think luck explains what happened here. There is something different about your species, a willingness to sacrifice, a refusal to surrender, a stubbornness that borders on insanity. The galaxy has seen many civilizations rise and fall, but I have never seen one quite like yours." The humans were offered membership in the collective. They accepted observer status but declined full membership. They were not ready to bind themselves to alliances they did not fully understand. They preferred to make their own way, to explore on their own terms, to build relationships based on mutual respect rather than mutual need. They were offered technology that would have advanced their capabilities by centuries. They accepted some of it, rejected some of it, and insisted on understanding all of it before implementing any of it. They would not become dependent on knowledge they had not earned themselves. They were offered protection by the collective's combined fleets. They politely declined. They had protected themselves once. They could do it again. 50 years after the invasion, humanity had colonies on 12 worlds. Their ships traveled the trade routes of the galaxy, carrying goods and ideas and the unmistakable presence of a species that had earned its place among the stars. Their soldiers were respected and feared, known for their creativity in battle and their absolute refusal to surrender. 100 years after the invasion, humanity had become one of the major powers in the galactic community. Their territory was not the largest, their population was not the biggest, their technology was not the most advanced, but their reputation was unmatched. Everyone knew the story of how they had faced thee and won. Everyone knew what happened to those who threatened Earth. Commander Morgan, now Admiral Morgan, retired at the age of 92. She spent her final years on a colony world, watching the stars from her garden and telling stories to the young people who came to visit her. She died peacefully in her sleep, surrounded by family and friends. President Daniel lived to see the first human vessel reach the edge of the galaxy. He died at 103, still sharp-minded and still convinced that his decision to fight had been the right one. His last words were simple: "Tell them to keep going. Tell them never to stop." The monument to the fallen was completed on the centennial anniversary of the invasion. It stood in the center of Geneva, a tower of crystal that reached toward the sky. Inside it were the names of every human who had died in the bombardment, every soldier who had fallen in battle, every scientist who had sacrificed themselves to save their species. At the base of the monument was an inscription that summarized everything humanity had learned from its first contact with alien life. We came in peace. They came in war. We asked for nothing. They demanded everything. We had every reason to surrender. We chose to fight instead. The stars are vast and full of dangers, but humanity will never be afraid. Cross our border once and you might live to regret it. Cross it twice and no one will ever find you. They had crossed it once. In all the centuries that followed, no one was ever foolish enough to cross it again. The galaxy had many wonders and many threats, but Earth remained safe, protected by its reputation and its strength and the unwavering determination of its people. The humans had proven something that the universe would never forget. They were small. They were young. They were alone in a hostile cosmos filled with ancient powers and terrible weapons. But they were not weak. They had never been weak. And anyone who made the mistake of thinking otherwise would learn the truth the hard way. Just like they had learned it. In the darkness between the stars, the light of Earth burned bright, and it would keep burning for as long as there were humans to tend the flame. This was their story, this was their victory, and this was only the beginning.